Depuis plus de 15 ans, le Centre de recherche interuniversitaire sur la littérature et la culture québécoise, le CRILC, organise un cycle de rencontres annuelles avec des écrivaines et des écrivains québécois. Ces rencontres sont animées par des chercheurs et des chercheuses en littérature, aussi bien jeunes que plus aguerris, ce qui permet de mettre en dialogue les textes, les auteurs et les autrices et les savoirs. Cette année, les rencontres d'écrivains et d'écrivaines du CRILC sont consacrées à la littérature de langue anglaise au Québec, à la place qu'elle occupe dans l'espace culturel québécois. Les rencontres visent à encourager un dialogue sur les relations entre l'écriture et les institutions littéraires qui l'encadrent. Les conversations se feront en français, en anglais ou dans un mélange des deux langues. La 4e discussion de ce cycle d'entretien porte sur le livre « Sitting Shiva on Minto Avenue by Toots » d'Erín Moure, sur la mémoire, l'aspect biculturel du livre, les milieux anglophones et francophones. Nous avons invité pour cette occasion Erín Moure, autrice de 50 livres, poésie, essais, mémoire, ainsi que des traductions et co-traductions du français, de l'espagnol, du galicien, du portugais et de l'ukrainien vers l'anglais. Récemment, elle a été traductrice internationale en résidence au Queen's College de l'Université d'Oxford en 2019, autrice invitée à la Kelly Writers House Program à l'Université de Pennsylvanie en 2020 et a donné en 2021 la conférence Leslie Scalapino Memorial à l'Université Naropa. À l'automne 2021, elle a été écrivaine en résidence virtuelle à l'Université de Winnipeg. C'est Robert Schwartzwald, professeur titulaire au département de littérature et de langue du monde de l'Université de Montréal et membre régulier du CRILC, qui anime cette rencontre. Il est également membre de l'équipe de recherche en études queer au Québec, EREC, chercheur au Centre d'études et de recherche internationale Cerium de l'Université de Montréal et président des prix G.I. Segal de la Bibliothèque publique juive de Montréal. Ses recherches portent sur des interfaces entre les notions de modernité nationale et de modernité culturelle, avec une attention particulière aux questions de sexualité.
Hello, Erin.
Hi, Robbie. Looking forward to talking to you this evening.
Yes, very pleased to do this with you. Tonight we're going to be speaking about your book, Sitting Shiva on Minto Avenue by Toots. And I thought I would just provide our listeners with a little bit of a synopsis about the book, which I see very much as a work of remembrance and commemoration for Paul-Émile Savard, a former worker with you on CN and Via Rail, a former lover in Vancouver and friend. And a few years back, for the time, perhaps ever, you didn't get a Christmas card from him, and you began to wonder what may have happened. And his cousin informed you of his death, and at that you decided, as you put it to me before, to place your memories of Paul outside yourself in a form that you call memoir fiction.
Yeah.
What I loved about the narrative is how it unfurls like a spiral. It sort of turns back in on itself to re-examine certain episodes and details of Paul's life and your relationship with him. And then each time it springs forward, producing a new insight or way of understanding them. I also love the way that you make free use of the internet in a dynamic kind of to and fro between personal remembrance and objective, even statistical information. And you also venture into family histories to sort of tease out some telling connections that say much about the structure of power and oppression under which Paul, his family, and yours lived or had lived. So these are the kind of things I want to explore with you today. If you'd like to add anything to that synopsis or modify it before I go on.
It's definitely, you've captured many of the things. I guess I'll say a couple of things. I guess whereas you see it as a work of remembrance, which is very legitimate, I see it now more from outside it as a work of social history. I think my friends led me to think of it that way, as at the same time as being a work of remembrance. Because I mean, my first goal was just to honor this person who was going to disappear from the earth. I realized, apart from his cousin, probably everything that was remembered about him was inside me, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it was inside other people, but they're not on the internet and they're not writers either. But I wanted to spend time to put all that outside of my own body on paper or on the screen. And in doing it, things I kept having, because I swore I was going to do it for 7 days. I was going to sit Shiva and keep him in my mind for 7 days. But so after I had done that, I didn't really have a goal when I was doing it. I wasn't writing it for a public at all. As I say, at the end of the book, I made it into a book, and I had about 18 copies, I think, that I gave to friends. And I just thought, if 18 people can read about Paul, it will be like he had a funeral, because he had no funeral and he has no gravestone. He has no nothing, His belongings all went in the garbage.
That's kind of an interesting coincidence, of which you say there are none, because 18 in Jewish numerology spells the word for life, chai. And so the fact that you had distributed the book to 18 people, is a kind of affirmation of life. I wanted to go back to the Shiva thing. First of all, it doesn't really appear in the book until day 3. And as you said, so I was wondering, did this occur to you before you started writing, or once you started writing and you realized that there was more to say, and that the sort of structure of 7 days in which, one is supposed to be in the same place and observe this kind of time, how did it occur to you?
To use that? Well, I think, first of all, we can't really tell the days because there's more chapters than there are days.
Right. Yeah.
They're not really named after the day, numbered out by the days. But although the first chapter is definitely the first day, I think because I'd sworn I was going to sit there for 7 days, I had to keep going deeper into some things. So it ended up in this kind of spiraling structure. But I think as well because I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and I learned more about Shiva and about various, I think partly because I live in Montreal, where there's Jewish community has always been very important, and where there's been, it's a much more Jewish city than, say, Vancouver, where there's lots of Jewish people, but it's not, that kind of historical flavor is not present. And as well, because I'd been doing research, because before I wrote this, I was in Ukraine several times, and I had been, some of my friends there work on recuperation of Jewish cemeteries and stuff like that in the city near where my family comes from, and just talking with them, if you're in an environment where people are talking and you're talking about death and grief and stuff, you're going to learn a bit.
Right.
It's going to be in my consciousness that it exists, and it's 7 days and it's grief and it's after someone dies. So I'll just borrow it, I'll just in my own way, which I describe my way as like not exactly kosher, if I could use an expression.
Yeah. What I liked as well, because you looked at a Jewish site on the internet, I think it was aish.com.
Yeah.
And, what I also really found interesting was your use of the notion of makom, the Hebrew word for place. And as you say, at the end of life, every soul returns to its makom, to its unique place in the world.
Yes.
And the site explains, if you could see the makom where the deceased now dwells, you'd comfort it. So you describe what you're trying to do is trying to see the makom and make it in words for the little man.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And when I read that on aish.com, well, first of all, I thought, I should say something about what I'm doing and make sure I'm not like committing a complete sacrilege. And so I put something of that in the book too. And so it was at that site where I found the most easy to understand and beautiful explanations, And when it said that at the end of life, every soul returns to its makom, to its unique place in the world. And then I just love that you could tell a mourner that instead of saying condolences, thoughts and prayers, you could say, we tell the mourner, if you could see them at calm where the deceased now dwells, you'd be comforted. I thought, that I do feel comforted now, you know?
Yeah, it comes with that other insight about consolation, you know, where you say that we ask God to console the mourners because we can't do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought, you know, you could have a spacing called God, you know. I like the idea of God being nameless too, because, you know, the more you can't pin it down, the more useful it is. You know?
Yes. So I was also struck, you know, reading the book that, as you say at one point too, you know, it fleshing a portrait of two cities that have radically changed over the years and the decades that in which the action takes place, and also of a kind of person who in a way doesn't really exist anymore because the social circumstances in which he was raised and in which he moved have also changed very much. You tell us, for example, like Paul never referred to himself as a Québécois, right?
Yeah.
But as a French Canadian.
Yeah.
And he seems to be of that, you know, time leading up to the Quiet Revolution, those decades that came up to the 1960s, where someone like him, he, as you say, he admired Pierre Trudeau and he encouraged you to learn French while you were working on the railway.
Yeah.
And yet he was, you know, and he was someone who was very much shaped by the pre-Quiet Revolution education system in Quebec, which really kind of circumscribed the opportunities he had. I don't know if you...
Of course,
so
yeah.
There's kind of an evocation of a whole social world that don't really know that well now.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, people forget. Well, I mean, I didn't know as a young adult, but he was older than me, and that people just went to, in the public school system in French, you just went to grade 7. After grade 7, if you were smart or somebody took you under their wing or whatever, you could get into Collège Classique and go. And there were kind of more public ones where people didn't have to spend a lot of money, because some of my friends went to those.
Mm-hmm.
But that to have an education up further than grade 7 was a special thing. And so, like a person from a working class family, his dad was a coach cleaner for the CPR at Glen Yards, which also doesn't exist anymore.
No.
His horizon came from hard work. His improved horizons came from hard work and not from education. And the whole kinds of thing, like I think in his family is in mine, the whole thing would be like, get a good job after you finish school, like get a good job. And a good job means get a union job inside, so you're not cold all the time, and so that you're not too taken advantage of all the time either, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I think, I mean, he, with his grade 7 education, worked all his life. He worked till he was 65, and supported himself, you know. But he was not a type of person who had a kind of desire to advance or become famous or whatever. He just wanted to, and he never seemed to have wanted children either. He just wanted to get by and to, you know. And then he also had the great medical kind of handicap of having a very severe case or variety of alcoholism,
Mm-hmm.
which I think it was partly because he was just a person who did not spiritually fit into our world. And it was just a way of dealing with that, you know?
Yeah. No, I want to talk about that in a few minutes, because I think,
Okay,
you know,
sure.
it does have a lot to do with what you talk about as his kind of spiritual relation to the world, even to the bed bugs, right, which he wouldn't harm.
Yeah.
Yep. But despite his grade 7 education, you talk about him as someone who was erudite and who read the papers avidly, who was actually interested in the world, but, you know, with that very different relation to it. In other words,
No, he got his information from the daily paper.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't read books or anything, but
Mm-hmm.
he sure read the paper, and he could discuss political things, and he had political views for sure, and he had which helped to situate himself in the world, even situating himself as a French Canadian. I mean, he didn't live in Quebec,
Right. Yeah.
and he wanted to just be separating Quebec would mean denying himself the right to just freely go and live in Vancouver, per se, which you could do as a French
Mm-hmm.
Canadian, but if you're just in Quebec, if Quebec is just itself, then maybe you can't do that as easily,
Mm-hmm. I mean, part of it that's interesting me, of course, is a lot of this takes place on the railway, right? And this must be a very special kind of society or kind of work environment where people live in a place, but going back and forth between these two poles of the country as well.
Yeah, well, we just went to Winnipeg and back, Vancouver to Winnipeg.
Uh-huh.
It was broken in two. We didn't go all the
Well,
way.
so the center of the country.
Yeah, but but we knew the crews from Montreal and Toronto because we traded off to them in Winnipeg.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Winnipeg cruise went in both directions, so there was different things. Well, to me it was my first. I worked in restaurants before at shitty cook jobs, and it was my first time that I was in a better union than the Canadian Restaurant Workers, which doesn't exist today. It's replaced by the same people that the Via Rail people are in, but
Uh-huh.
now I forget what it's. But I was the first time I had a job that I made, a decent wage at, and working on the railway. I worked right at the beginning of when I worked in the customer department, as did Paul, and I was worked there at the beginning when they hired women, and so we were some of the guys did not like us uh, being there, and then some were just
Mm-hmm.
a pain in the neck in the Me Too way, and but except for there's a large, like, the population of people who work on board trains then, I don't know what it's like now, was like there was a lot of Black people work there. There was a lot of East and South Asians as well, a lot of people from the West Indies, and so, as well as Polish and Ukrainians and Portuguese and so on, and people from the Maritimes, a lot of people from the Maritimes, so that it was and also a lot of people who had come as refugees at the end of World War II were still working.
Uh-huh.
So there was a real kind of mix that I don't think I would have found in any other kind of workplace. And I learned a lot about history, and immigration and the war and everything else just from talking to these people. And I will say too that when I first started to work there, it was the Black guys who protected the women because they knew what it was like to be kicked around,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and not treated as equal. And it was Black guys from Winnipeg that were the ones who said, "Aaron, if anybody gives you any trouble, you tell us, we fix them."
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, we're having this conversation as this new series, The Porter, is on CBC, right? Which is
Yeah,
about the kind of struggles
in the
of Black porters
1920s.
in the
Yeah,
1920s. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So, well, I guess it starts in the 20s. I hope it gets past the 20s. But yeah, that's kind of fun. The Porter. I'm looking forward to watching that. But there's also an NFB film about the porters and their labor work for labor unions that help
okay.
improve things
Mm-hmm.
in the workforce. Not just for that, they struggled for themselves. They had to bring the CN to court under the Canadian Human Rights Act, which David Baker passed, and actually told some of them, was friends with them because he rode the train quite a bit. He told them, "You guys got to go to court and bring the government to court," which they did in the 60s, and won the right to be promoted up through the ranks into other jobs than sleeping car porter. That didn't reach CP till 78 when we were
Wow.
combined into VIA. But those guys were really a rich part of my life, and And I really happened to notice when I got over to headquarters that the Black people had disappeared. Like, I used to think, like, is something wrong with these people? No one wants to hang out with them. Like, why are they all here by themselves, these white people?
So I just wanted to go back to the early years of Paul, such as it's interesting because he grew up in No Damn Good, as you call it, or as it was called, I guess, NDG,
Yeah,
Notre Dame de Grâce, on Minto Avenue,
yeah,
a street that no longer exists
yeah,
because it was destroyed to build the Décarie Expressway. Neither does Belmont Park, the amusement ground at the end of the Décarie tram line, nor Blue Bonnets, the racetrack
yeah.
where Paul and your mother like to go.
Or Glen Yards either.
Yeah, the Glen Yards. So, and on the Vancouver end, you seem like you retrace your lives together through the restaurants where you ate,
Yes.
hotel bars, meals you cooked together, and most of those restaurants and places have either disappeared or been repurposed.
Oh, definitely.
So it's like memory, which we think of as a kind of time travel in a way. Sort of needs to inscribe itself in place, so like in the actual body's interactions with place.
Right.
And
well, that's where it becomes kind of fiction too, because nobody can actually trace it. And that's where I wanted to use the internet, which is like it's my external hard drive, the internet. So it's my brain. So I just go into my own brain. Because just to try and figure out like the Plaza 500 or whatever it was called across from City Hall in Vancouver, what is it now? Is it still there? Is it torn down? So I could look up, and I found out the history of it having been emptied out because they found black mold in there during renovations, and it's condos now. But even the things that I wrote in this book in 2015 or at the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. So even some of the up-to-date information in there off the internet is no longer up to date. But definitely, like I walked around Chinatown, and I recognized the buildings where we went, but the restaurants are not there anymore. There's something out there.
But there's one, was it the old Greek restaurant where you still have traces of the Greek restaurant? Building isn't
that turned into some breakfast joint. The Greek Village.
Yeah, the Greek Village, right?
Where all the sailors would go. Where my mom would buy me supper with her winnings from the racetrack.
As a matter of fact, Paul's cousin tells you that among the very few possessions found in his bedbug-infested hotel room are the letters and books you sent him. And you say, she says to you, she tells you, it gave his life meaning.
Yeah.
You say that was not for her to say. What she really meant or could have said was that she herself finally realized that her cousin's life had been meaningful because he had loved someone.
Yeah.
So your relationship with Paul was difficult. You admired, I'm quoting you, his ears and sideburns and his hands, his voice and thoughts, and all the ways he spoke, and his charm and gentlemanly demeanor. But I've already pointed out he was an alcoholic, which is a great source of distress and even danger for you at times.
Oh, yeah.
So you find your own room in Kitsilano. You go and spend more and more time there. You stop telling him about your poetry readings. But as you insist, you say, I don't want anyone to remember Paul as the body of the little man turned into a void by alcohol, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about him as a being man whose pattern you want to figure out. Can you say a little bit more about these notions of being man? I don't know if it comes from Deleuze or it's something that you've spinned out yourself, and pattern.
Well, I think it probably comes from some of my readings from Agamben over time.
Okay.
But just, I guess Deleuze you could throw in there too. But the idea that he's a being man is that by doing the things he does, helping the people around him, trying to keep his job and stuff, he's being a man. That a man is not a thing. It's something. It's an action that has to be continually repeated and invested with meaning. And he was not. This was his version of of masculinity. was to be able to support himself, to be able to be kind to others, to cook for others, to make sure they had help if they were sick or they needed something. Like he was very much, and he lived in a world where masculinity, you had to do more than that. You had to kind of chuck yourself around a bit more or something. Like he was not that kind of, like I always saw him as an angel instead of a man with these beautiful hands, and he he was he understood masculinity and manhood in a different way, and in a way that society didn't appreciate, patriarchal society didn't appreciate. And I mean, that's some of the things I think that made him an alcoholic, that made him ill, were were what masculinity and him trying to operate outside of it in his being man way,
Mm-hmm.
and then also the history of failed colonization, the generational trauma of being sent off to Abitibi before. Yeah, I don't know if he was born there, if it was, but it all occurred really before he was conscious of it, But but just that, the fact too that he was as somebody said once, a quarter of Quebec, of Québécois, French descendants from the first colonists have indigenous blood or indigenous ancestor somewhere, but he didn't make anything of that, but he wasn't trying to get a job on the CBC or get a grant or anything. However, he did acknowledge that he had part indigenous history, and I think a lot of that, he absorbed a lot of hurt from that, from somewhere, from the past, and from that,
You sort of introduced Judith Butler's observation as the chiasm, as the way in which we become implicated in someone else's life that is not our own.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of crossing over. And what's interesting to me, how you do that kind of crossover between your own extended family's history and Paul's, where there's this Abitibi connection.
Yeah.
And, I wish you would talk a little bit more about that, because you said at the beginning of our conversation that you're more and more looking at this as work of social history. I do want to come back to some of the other issues that,
right,
issues of love and grievability. But since you raised it, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that history, which is vastly underappreciated, I think, and something which really isn't confronted necessarily.
No, I don't think it's confronted at all, and some people are not feel uncomfortable about confronting it because they still have this. There's still a bit of a strain in social Quebec actuality, in a sense that this was a glorious colonization and opening up of space, like without. I mean, decolonial theory hasn't penetrated as deeply in French as it has in English yet, but that this colonization, it was something to do with all the unemployed people during the Depression. Send them up there and train these urban people how to farm, and most of them failed and went back and were insulted in the press and insulted by the church. But it was also a place where the church held full sway, and where if you sold, I get this from my aunt's family, her dad went up there with his family. He had immigrated, her parents had immigrated from Italy, and farmed in Alberta, and he gave up his farm in Alberta to come to Quebec because he thought it would be better for his kids because they could learn two languages,
Mm-hmm.
English and French, and then they had Italian at home. And I mean, I came in touch with that part of my family because it was like a cut off part of my family because of tuberculosis, because my uncle actually died before he could marry my aunt's sister. But we came together and felt that they would be, that we were family, because they would have got married if it wouldn't been for tuberculosis. But in Abitibi, I do introduce into the book a bit of the story of my aunt's family. One of her older sisters wrote a book about it that's self-published, and like few sides of my family were famous for our self-published books. But so people could actually find that book, and I give a reference to it. But it tells the story of their father and what the horrifying experience that he had up in Saint-Marc-de-Figueray, when he tried to tell people around him that it wasn't fair that the priest ran everything, and that they could elect a mayor and council and have like democracy. Anyway, so the Catholic Church did the man in, that's for sure. But and that story's in the book. And then I also looked up the history of, like, what happened to the indigenous people? How can they send people up there to farm, in the 1930s? And how the indigenous people on the Ontario side of the border got a treaty, kind of late treaty, but on the Quebec side of the border, Quebec refused to participate. I don't know how, I thought treaties were federal anyways, but there was some kind of hokum there where people were deprived of their space. And I do have a reference to that in there as well. So I think it's kind of social history, because I kept asking myself questions like, what about this, and where did these people go, and
Yeah, I mean, there. As I was saying earlier, the ways in which you use the internet and other research is interesting. So even in Paul's case, where the entry that you incorporate into the book about the Hilton Hotel, right, which talks about it as a structure or as a building, right, with its architectural features and its decorative features, but it more or less completely evacuates the building of any human habitation.
Yeah.
So
it says it was created for single men working in the extractive industries.
Right. So that's how it was created. But in terms of a social history, it's kind of interesting, because the questions you're asking actually want to repopulate that building, at least in more contemporary terms.
Right.
So, and you have this kind of heritage site language, which fixes the building at its origins with a word or two about its evolution. So this is, to me, like reading these kinds of things being juxtaposed, shows us like the different textures of different forms of memory, or sort of different forms, the differences we make between theory and memory, things like that. I thought there was, in terms of these family crossovers, I mean, the Abitibi stories are very tragic, and as you say, the failure of Paul's family in the Abitibi is actually marked on his body. It's incorporated into his body, and probably into his relation to the world. There's a more, I don't know if you want to call it comic, but a more serendipitous association you make, where you realize at one point that Paul looks uncannily like a well-touched-up Dean Martin, where you talk about his uncanny resemblance to your mother's boyfriend, as you put it, because she, like my mother, watched the Dean Martin show every week.
And everybody had to shut up while she was. Everybody had to shut up while we watched the Dean Martin show, and so that's why Dean Martin got the nickname of Mom's boyfriend.
And you sort of talk about that, that sort of similarity between the way your name is pronounced and the Italian word amore, which is his song "That's Amore," which was on there all the time. But you say, I went away from home and fell in love with Paul, the image of my mother's TV boyfriend who made her feel more at home in America, which I really love. So, but
the funny thing, because the little man loved Dean Martin too.
That's a question I had. When you say at some point it wasn't actually you who first called him little man, but when I read Little Man, I'm wondering, I haven't read the French translation of your book, but...
C'est le petit homme.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask if it was Le Petit Bonhomme, It's not, huh?
No, it's le petit homme.
It's le petit homme. Okay.
Oui.
Yeah. So
Well, le petit homme.
because there's
because it's very important that he's a man. We're not making fun of him. He's a man. He's a being man.
That's right.
And it was a friend of mine who called him the little man.
Because it's also more like since you began with Shiva and Makom, it's a little bit like mensch, this idea.
Oh yes.
Being a mensch, and as you say, that's someone which is a continuous process of behaving ethically in the world, right?
Yeah. That would fit him exactly. He was a mensch for sure, except for under the influence of alcohol. But even then, he was okay sometimes.
I also really, I think for a book being talked about in Quebec in a series on English writing, I really like the very beautiful way in which you introduce Rilke's notion of the two solitudes. And, I think for many people in Canada, most people know the expression from Hugh MacLennan's novel, right?
Right.
Where it describes a state of kind of cultural and historical fracture between the French and the English. But you restore it to Rilke's original purpose.
Yeah. I actually wasn't even thinking of the two solitudes of Quebec and Canada. I was just thinking of Rilke at the time.
Good for you. No, it's, but I just wanted to quote because, he says, the more human love is one which we prepare painfully and with struggle, so that the two solitudes may protect, border, and greet each other.
Yeah.
I believe this love will remain in your memory because it was your first deep aloneness and the first inner work that you had done in your life.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, we have this notion of unity and incorporating the beloved, and on the other hand, the beloved who provides you the opportunity to do this inner work.
Yeah. Well, and that love too is about this protecting, bordering, and greeting each other's solitude. It's not merging with each other or
right.
Running a family corporation. It's this thing, and so it could be. It's also then to say that this more human love. It could be love between. It could be love that's not. What do you call it? Requited. It doesn't talk about sex, but it could be. It's human love. It goes across genders, across couplings, across all those kinds of things, across whatever lust and desire. It's another thing. It's something. This thing, is something we prepare painfully and with struggle, and to protect, border, and greet each other like that.
Yeah.
To me, that would be the notion that applied.
And it, quite even more so. I mean, you say, Paul was the first man to say to you, you are a lesbian, right?
Yeah.
And unlike men who you meet in the future, he's, he adjusts and he accommodates to that.
Yeah.
And it does, and this, this again is, perhaps today in the circles that we sort of run in or whatever, this is not so extraordinary, but it certainly speaks to that broader idea of love, right?
Yeah, but that it's also still a job, and it's really serious, and and I mean, people in their couples, and I mean, you've seen this in work and seen it in not work, and I have too, is that if people can really protect, border, and greet each other in their solitudes, like you have such an enduring bond with that person,
Yes.
We have that bond. Sometimes it is a bond of love with our friends, with some of our friends, and with the person that we're with too, sometimes, and sometimes not,
No, I do love that idea of bordering, and we often talk about protect, but these ideas of bordering and greeting, because greeting implies a renewal, right? It's one doesn't greet someone with whom one spends time continuously, as if it's all of the same.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the experience with Paul too, right? That something which endured and which was a kind of commitment.
Yeah. Well, and even in it endured, I mean, he accepted who I was and let me go off on my life, but still always kept in touch. I mean, we always exchanged birthday and Christmas cards. He always phoned me around Christmas, and we did care about each other. And he never. What was curious was he never had another. He had a girlfriend for a while, but he never had another girlfriend. It was like that was.
Yeah, you mean.
It was very strange,
He was. I mean, it's interesting because you told me in an earlier conversation, that after he left the railway, he had a job in I guess, I don't know if we would call it a CHSLD, but a seniors home.
Yeah, it was kind of like all those initials.
Yeah, one of those.
It was,
and that he even stayed. That his, that too was a kind of love, and that he even stayed after the home had been privatized and the wages had been cut.
Yeah,
it's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, no,
he saw it as a kind of calling. You said.
Yeah, no, it mattered more to him to be there for those people and to give kindness to these elderly people, to help them eat, to be with them. He really liked being with old people and helping them. It was a calling, I would say. He was, and that was part of his being man too. It was to take care of people, these people who couldn't,
Mm-hmm.
And he did that more successfully than, say, at one other point in the book, I talk about how in the bar he would try and break up fights. And he was so little, though. He was small, like 5'6"
yes.
or something, that he wasn't like the best person to separate big bruisers, loggers trying to attack each other in the bar.
Did he suffer from that?
Anybody, he would try to get people to sit down. Well, he would just stand up and he'd scowl at them and stand between them, and people would go and sit down. That was it. But
so,
he.
No, I was going to say, here's this extraordinarily kind, generous person who believes in, in all living things. And your fear is, as you say, he isn't going to be remembered or mourned. And you go to Judith Butler's idea about grievability.
Yeah, grievable.
And
yes.
It's interesting because often, at least in, the concept of grievability in Butler's work too, it's often in relation to political or social groups or people. She uses it, for example, to talk about the Israel-Palestine situation and how Palestinian deaths were not considered grievable.
Yeah.
And she, then goes on to talk about how societies, through their structures, see deaths and suffering as either worthy or unworthy of being mourned. And here you are applying this, in a sense, to an individual, and you're determined that his purpose and goodness not be lost. And you refuse. I refuse to let it happen that his life is not grievable. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's why I just thought that if these people my friends would read the book, they would meet him, and that it would be like he had a funeral. And I always thought, like, 18 people came to his funeral, he would think that was great. He was, he would think that he would feel that justice had been done to him. Or if it was somebody else, I can't say what he would have thought of for himself, but I went to a few very tiny funerals of people who died, old guys who died in the single room hotels,
Yeah.
So, but I think just because I think about grievability in that sense, I mean, Judith Butler does talk about groups which are affected by, politics and structural racism, Indigenous people in our prisons, for example. And not just here, but all over. And but people who live in poverty and who live a very marginal existences also don't get grieved, you know. All
Right.
the people that die from opiates, you know, and that people have no great sympathy for when they're caught up in a system, they're caught up in a structure too that addicted them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's my idea,
No,
anyways. And
no, I think it sort of looking at some of the sources that you bring into the book, and it also comes back to Agamben too, where you want to, on the one hand, just as you said, there would be a tendency to see someone with a marginal, from the view of dominant society, a marginal life such as Paul's, with his socially unacceptable behavior like alcoholism, and his occupancy of a single room in a kind of sketchy hotel. All of this might be seen as someone reduced to Agamben's bare life. But you take issue with that.
yeah.
And you introduce Agamben's other idea of form of life, right? That which you say is the simple fact of being alive meant everything to Paul. But even so, it is not possible to isolate in his form of life a bare life. And indeed, he wanted to live, and that's one of the epiphanies in the book. I think at some point you just sense the relief where you understand that he went to the hospital so he could live.
Yes.
And this makes you happy, right?
Yeah.
Like this is a great relief in some way.
Because he still had agency. He had agency. Like we make our being alive, the form of life or form of being alive is that you have to keep doing it, And that's why I sort of say he's the Aristotelian man whose life is neither praxis
or poesis.
Nor poesis. It was a form of being alive, not yet accounted for by any of the current definitions of work, production, accumulation, market, and success. Like just when I'm talking about him going to the hospital to live, it's like he didn't have the markers of success, but to me, he was a success story because he was that being man, and he did that. He did it. I just feel like he did something important that because of in the kind of signal to noise situation that we don't always notice noises that barely rise off the floor, off the noise floor, the sounds that we don't identify them as signals. And he was one of those signals that didn't have to be a loud noise.
No, it kind of is epitomized in his, I don't know if I want to call it a blessing or something like that, where, the shine on little star, so this very beautiful.
Oh yes, shine on me, little star.
Yes.
I still say that to the sun. He used to say that to the sun and once to a street light when he was drunk.
Yes, there's that's a very funny moment in the book where you point out to him that it is not the sun, and he looks at you like you're crazy or something. Like
what? He was having his little moment there.
Such a little reminded poet, he's thinking. I don't know. It's very funny.
No, I still say, and other people who know him, I was actually surprised how many people were like, Erin, remember I knew Paul. Reminded me that they knew him, and then they would say, shine on me, little star. It was his idea about that spirit was in the air, and that this little star, which was the sun, could actually like be shining on you, like to me, the sun shines and you're there. And his other idea too, that the sky goes right down to the ground.
Yes, you can touch it.
Think of the sky as being up high, but the sky goes right down to the ground, and it goes all around your body and into your mouth too. And I find that like setting that beside Aristotle and Judith Butler and Giorgio Agamben is important, because I feel like what he had to say was just as important.
Yeah, no, that's what comes through so beautifully, is that you're not making of Paul a case study to sort of test Agamben or Butler, but rather he informs their work, right? And he sort of illuminates it through his particular way of living, his as you put, a being for whom persistence is itself a value and life and is needed here in our world at every moment, right?
Yeah.
So that's, that's, I think, something that shines through, if I can put it that way, through the entire book.
Can I throw in one sentence, though, just because I know we're getting close to the end, but I was just thinking of something that I
Sure.
I want to say, in keeping with what you've just been saying, is that like if we look at the book as a whole as a work, and I can try to look at it that way myself now, because I'm not like selling it as a memoir. I really think that something complicated came out. I don't know why it came out of me like that, but it's also a book about somebody who comes from a very marginalized background and life that didn't stand out in terms of all the measures of success that we set for people today, or that most people who are middle class or whatever set for themselves. And yet I could write about him because I'm the kind of person who I lived that life with him. I remember being with people on Skid Row, who were fine people.
Yeah.
And in Chinatown, and where they were very nice to the people on Skid Row, by the way. And that's the station, and just the history of things around the station, and all that. At the same time, I'm a person who has read Aristotle. I have read Deleuze. I have read Judith Butler. I love Judith Butler. And I have read Agamben, and many things I love about Agamben, and others I don't like at all. But his work has meant a lot to me, And at the same time, we've got Dean Martin.
Yes.
Too. So.
No, as I say, for me, it was, as I might have said to you, I can almost see Paul in one of those old CN or CN trains, even before it became Via Rail.
Oh, yeah.
And, in a funny way, because they were men of a kind, or they were charming, and they were wry, I remember, and took great pride in their work. Like that I could also see.
Absolutely.
And, you sort of wondered what the backstory was, because you saw them in transit only, right?
Right.
These were people who would get off the train with their little suitcase, right?
Yeah,
and
their grip.
You sort of wondered, well, where do they come from? What did they do? And the book evokes that entire world, and yet it speaks obviously to all the issues and all the problems that we experience today. So you talk about that park in front of the CN station in Vancouver, and you talk about the downtown east side, and these things haven't gotten better. In fact, things have become more dire, as you point out.
Yeah, no, I point that out. There was more of a feeling of possibility and community, and there was more stores and stuff still open, and the storekeepers stuck up for people. And in places like the Only, like they gave people free food.
Yep.
When they knew they couldn't pay and stuff like that. There was more of a feeling of community that was destroyed by time and neglect, and by the social system that doesn't support people who suffer from addiction problems, that doesn't support Indigenous people, that doesn't support the industrial workers in the extractive industries who come back to town injured, and those like the logging and the mining industries just spit you out. And so they're just, that's why they're there,
Yeah.
So
no, I see.
It's just increased.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the book is, really brings together these questions about ways of loving, and what we owe each other and what we do for each other, and retrieving that from, the kind of statistical approach that, we sort of get to what are called social problems. So
right.
It was a very moving experience for me to read your book.
Yeah, well, I think it was, I realized that it was an effective experience for people when my friends came back to me and said, Erin, are you going to get this published? And I was like, oh no, it's just like, it's personal. Like, why would I do that? I just wanted to have a funeral for Paul and in my way. And they said, no, this book has meaning like more people should read it. And so that's them pushing me that got it published, and them pushing me as well that got it translated into French.
Well, you say at one point that translations are hard work and sometimes unwanted. But this one, I'm very glad it was translated into French. It is a book that is needed, I think, too. So I'm really happy your friends convinced you to go ahead with it and publish it. So thank you for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Robbie. And I hope everybody who listens to it gets something out of it.
Merci d'avoir écouté cet entretien entre Erín Moure et Robert Schwartzwald, un entretien réalisé en collaboration avec Magnéto et qui s'est enregistré virtuellement dans le respect des consignes de distanciation sociale. Pour découvrir d'autres auteurs et autrices, retrouvez tous les épisodes des rencontres d'écrivains et d'écrivaines du CRILC sur votre application balado préférée.